The sun has gone down at Hangman's Hill, and the ghost at Misery Corner isn't walking tonight. So, welcome to the Weird Tales Radio Show, your weekly fix of ghost stories, urban myths, witchcraft, magic, and folklore. And now, here's your host, writer, award-winning journalist, best-selling author, and sometime werewolf hunter, Charles Christian.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Weird Tales Radio Show, the home of geek, folklore and paranormal entertainment with me, Charles Christian, as once again we delve into the worlds of weirdness, urban myths, history, geek culture, ghosts, magic, witchcraft, the occult, and anything else I think will intrigue you. We've a fantastic guest for you this week, Lara Maiklem, the author of the Sunday Times bestseller Mudlarking, Lost and Found on the River Thames, which is all about the history of the River Thames and the thousands of things Lara's found and rescued from the river mud, including Tudor shoes, medieval pins, Roman pots, Georgian wig curlers, modern wedding rings, as well as lots of mobile phones. Lots of mobile phones. Her latest book, A Field Guide to Larking, extends the scope to also include beachcombing, field walking, and much more, including the kind of treasures you may find in your own home. Lara, great to speak to you. I'm sure you're going to mention it, but good luck with the new book, A Field Guide to Larking, beachcombing, mudlarking, field walking, and many other things that's coming out on the 19th of August.
Thank you very much.
This is your follow-on to your best-selling Mudlarking, Lost and Found on the River Thames, which I have to confess is one of the few actual paperbacks as opposed to digital books I've purchased in recent years. Which says something. But,
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. It's funny you should say that, actually, because people write to me, which is lovely. And I've had quite a lot of messages from people who have said, I don't normally read books or I don't usually buy books, but I've read yours and I actually finished it. So yeah, it's great when people say that. It's brilliant. It's getting people to read actual real books.
Yeah. It's one of those books that I found myself late at night and just sort of read it all the way through, as opposed to lost interest halfway through and put it aside thinking I really must finish that later because, I ought to. I just thoroughly enjoyed the whole thing. It was great. Did you have a career in writing, journalism or anything before you wrote this book? Because I say, it is very, very well written.
Thank you. Well, I've worked in publishing my whole career.
Right.
But I'm usually on the other side of the desk. I'm an editor. And I never wanted to write my own book because I knew probably too much about what went into it, all the blood, sweat and tears that went into it and the hard work. And so I wasn't one of those editors that was just a frustrated author at all. But it did take a little bit of persuading to get me to write. And when I did, there was a lot of blood, sweat and tears, I can tell you, that went into it. But when I finished it, it was a great achievement. I suppose I'm not a great runner, but it must be a bit like running a marathon. The achievement, the feeling of achievement you get when it's finished it was worth it.
Yes, indeed. And I say it's particularly important because it is potentially a very dry subject, history. Everybody groans. I mean, I was the strange boy at school who loved history, but for a lot of people, it's just a turn-off subject. But I mean, you've made it totally accessible, and it's won all manner of awards and sold by the lorry load. So a lot of other people clearly have fallen for it as well.
Thank you. I mean, I think history gets a bit of a bad rap. I mean, certainly when I was at school, the history books were deadly boring. and museums were incredibly dull. You go to museums now, and they're interactive, they're interesting. Things are changing hugely, and I think history, there is a sort of a bit of an X factor going on with history. You know, there's Lucy Worsley's making it a lot more interesting. People like her, and it is undergoing a bit of a renaissance, and it is sort of it's moving away from those sort of tweedy suited old men with fusty books into what it really is, which is fascinating, but you need to find the bit of history that speaks to you, that you can associate yourself with,
which of course is why mudlarking is so fascinating, because you're talking about the River Thames, and I suppose I always knew this was the case, but had never quite really put two and two together. But people have been dropping or chucking into the Thames all manner of stuff for 2,000 years. And it's this collection of largely domestic stuff. I mean, we're not talking about archaeology digging up lost statues and things, but it's the everyday stuff. And the sheer volume of it, which is mind-boggling to read about.
Yeah, I mean, people have been throwing things into the river since prehistory. There's obviously the Battersea Shield and Waterloo helmet that were thrown in as offerings. So people have been using the river as a receptacle for many thousands of years. And of course, it's a useful dump, really. That's why there's so much there. It's a rubbish dump. And rivers all over the country have been used as rubbish dumps. It's not just the Thames. If you can get to a river, you'll find stuff in most rivers, because we didn't have bin men. We didn't have people taking the rubbish away. So that people sort of threw things into river. You throw it in and it's gone. It doesn't bother you anymore. And the Thames, of course, there's been such intense habitation since the Romans. There's all these things that have been dumped, things that have been dropped, lost and forgotten, orphaned objects, and they change on every tide. That's the beauty of the Thames, because it's tide. That's the best thing about the river, is that it's got this fantastic history, and it's also tidal, so you can get down onto the riverbed itself twice a day, and you can search for these objects that shift and change with the tides. And you mentioned archaeology. It's not. There aren't sort of stratified layers like there are on land. It is just this big mess and muddle of history. So you'll find something Victorian lying next to a prehistoric flint, maybe. And that's what I love about it. It's like a big lucky dip. Yeah.
The fact that when the Thames was a major river for commercial craft, that all manner of old rubble was squashed down there to use for berths for ships and things. So, even more stuff going into the pile.
Absolutely. I mean, they used rubbish to build up the foreshore because, of course, a river is V-shaped in its natural state. And so they had to build up the river bank right next to the river wall so that the flat-bottom barges could sit on it at low tide. And they used rubbish to do that in the 18th and 19th century. But they were also they were using spoil from cellars that they were digging through the Roman layers and the medieval layers. So they were dumping all this mass of stuff from further inland from the city onto the foreshore, packing it down and putting a chalk cap on top because it was nice and soft on the bottom of the barges. And of course, the barges and the ships stopped coming in the 1960s, and people just the foreshore, the river, was largely ignored through the 60s, 70s, 80s, and the river has started eating into this and returning its shape back to its natural V form, and it's digging into all of this rubbish and scattering it across the foreshore. So a lot of what we find is from these barge beds, especially in central London.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Now, what got you originally interested in it? Was it, childhood poking around in rock pools and then, working in London and noticing the riverbeds when the tide was out? Or it seems at first glance a bit of an odd thing if you are not an archaeologist or of that ilk to think, let's go wading around in the bottom of this stinking river and see if I find anything.
I suppose it is. I mean, I grew up in the countryside and on a farm. And I've just always, I think I probably spent most of my life looking down and picking things up. I had a little chest of drawers museum in one of the barns, and I just picked stuff up. When I went out for a walk, I might find, an old snake skin or something, and interesting leaves and oak galls and sort of natural stuff that you used to find around the farm. And then we had a medieval village at the top of the farm, so whenever the plough went through that, you could go up and pick up the medieval pottery. We had a midden in the garden where everyone had thrown their rubbish over the centuries. And so, I could dig around in the garden beds and find bits of pottery. And so, I've always had this sort of fascination with history. I lived in a very old house, that sort of love of hands-on history. And also I just love finding things, anything out of the ordinary, anything that doesn't look like it quite fits, just interesting things. So, when I moved to London, when I finished university in the early 90s, I was just really missing the outdoor space. I really wanted to move to London. I wanted the buzz of London, but I was just missing being outside. And it took me a long time. I was sort of searching all the various parks and gardens there are in London until I eventually found the river. And it is really, still is really a forgotten space. We've got this wonderful wild sort of creature that snakes its way through central London. It cuts the city in half, that brings nature in and takes it away. It's this big sort of natural artery that breathes. It goes up and down. And, for the longest time, I'd walk along the Thames Path. You can walk for miles along the Thames Path. Mm-hmm. And I'd see these stairs and ladders down onto the foreshore and notice that the river was going up and down. I don't know why, it just didn't occur to me that I could go down there for quite some time. And I think, you speak to a lot of people who live in London and they'll say the same thing. I don't know whether I thought maybe I wasn't allowed or it was dangerous. But then one day I decided I'd go down these old stairs and I found a clay pipe stem. Mm-hmm. Was the very first thing I found. And I knew exactly what it was because I used to find them in the garden at home. And I reasoned that if there was one thing there was going to be more. And so I went back. And every time I went back, I seemed to find something different. And it gets addictive. It gets really addictive. And I just found myself going back again and again. And it just became my go-to place, sort of my sanity space in the city, just to get away from London itself. And it just grew from that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, you mentioned clay pipe stems. That's one of the things that you bring up in the book because I've found them digging in gardens and things like when I was a kid. But I never quite appreciated that they were a mass-produced product, that they were sold ready stuffed with tobacco and essentially they were disposable. They were, rather like a Starbucks plastic beaker, the equivalent of that. You smoked them and dumped them, and that's why there are so many of them, as opposed to lots of pipe smokers in olden days had accidents with their pipes. I mean, they just tossed them away.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a myth that they smoked them once and then threw them away because, our ancestors were anything but, sort of a throwaway society. Everything had to be bought, hard-earned, and made by hand. So they'd smoke them until they got too short. They broke very easily, and especially if you have one in your pocket and you were working away, the end could break off quite easily. They also clogged up with tar quite quickly, yes. And they'd snap them off and just to keep them going. And then eventually they got so short they became nose warmers. They just were too hot to smoke, and then they threw them away. But obviously, everybody smoked. Every children, women, they smoked as they buried people in the plague pits because they thought it kept away the bad miasmas. Kept them healthy. And so, it was everybody smoked. The streets around Covent Garden were inches thick with clay pipes, old clay pipes. And so that's really why you find them. You find them everywhere. You find them in fields and gardens, under floorboards. Those and the willow pattern plate are probably the most common things you're likely to find anywhere, I think.
Yes. What was it with the willow pattern plates? I mean, again, that's relatively recent, isn't it? What, 18th century willow pattern came in? Late
18th century. It was the potteries up in Staffordshire. it was very, very fashionable to have the blue and white pottery that was imported from China, but it was expensive.
Yeah.
And by the end of the 18th century, they were starting to mass produce pottery, so more people could afford it and poorer people could afford it. And so to answer this demand for the blue and white fashion and the craze, they created this willow pattern that, pretty much everyone's will recognise. And it looks very Chinese, but it's actually pure invention. And they also invented a story that went with it. So it's actually in my next book, the story. And you can follow the story through the whole plate. And once you've learnt it, you'll never sit down to dinner on a willow pattern plate. It'll never be the same again because you'll know what's going on this. But it was just a marketing ploy, just to sell, more plates to people.
I didn't know that. I must admit, I honestly thought that the willow pattern was a Chinese, because I remembered it. It's the two birds are the lovers reunited or something, and
there's a rich man with a daughter, and a rich duke comes across the sea on his boat laden with jewels to marry her, but she's fallen in love with an accounting clerk, and the father builds a fence around to keep him out, but they run away together, and the father's running after them with his whip, and you can see them going across the little bridge, and they jump on the duke's boat and escape to an island, but the duke tracks them down with his soldiers, and the gods take pity on them and turn them into doves, and that's the end of the story.
Now, that's wonderful. There's clearly some long-lost 18th century advertising whiz out there.
Very, very clever one. Yes,
came up with that one.
You're listening to the Weird Tales radio show with Charles Christian.
One of the things you said, you went down the steps and when you first started mudlarking, but as you do stress in both Mudlarking and in the latest book, Larking, it's not a free-for-all, that you've got to get a license, is it, for if you're in parts of London, and some parts are strictly, they're historical sites and there's strictly no digging allowed at all?
Absolutely. On the tidal Thames, you are on private property, private land. It's owned and administered by the Port of London Authority. So you need a license to do it. The license is really easy to get. You can apply for it from their website, and it lasts for 3 years. And under the terms of your license, you have to report anything that you find of historic value. Or interest, not so much value, but interest. So anything over 300 years old and of historic interest has to be reported to the Portable Antiquities Scheme, which is an incredible project done by it's part of the British Museum, and they are recording all the ownerless objects that are found in fields and rivers and beaches all over the country, all the things that aren't dug up. They're just found by ordinary people and metal detectorists and people like that. And it's really important that we have we have a record of these, because this is our history, and what you don't want is people finding them and forgetting about them, or heaven forbid, trading in them and selling them. So you have to report them. It's your moral duty to do that. If you find anything that qualifies as treasure, that's over 300 years old and made of a precious metal, that's very simply put, you have to by law report that to a coroner.
Yes.
And we do find treasure on the foreshore, and it's illegal not to report that. The objects that you find you don't own, the Port of London Authority are very generous. They let you keep them, but you're not allowed to sell them. And this is to stop the foreshore from becoming a cash and carry, really, for eBay, because it's not that place. It's not that sort of place, and it mustn't become that sort of place. It's very important that people don't start doing it to sell things, So yes, and there are areas that are scheduled monuments, so they're as protected as Stonehenge. You're not allowed to go in there. You're not allowed to mudlark or take anything away. There are areas where you're not allowed to disturb the foreshore at all. You're only allowed to pick things up off the surface. So once you get your permit, there are a series of maps that you should look at and work out where you can go, where you can't go, and what you can and can't do. It's very, very important to mudlark responsibly. Yeah. And that's something that I absolutely focus on through both the books.
Yeah, and I mean, in the second book, you even include a suggested letter format if you're going field walking, which is basically walking over a ploughed field before the crops started growing, to contact the landowner for permission for that as well.
Absolutely. Never, be aware that, you can't just go searching someone else's fields or land. You need their permission. Yeah. And many landowners will be quite happy, especially if you're not disturbing it or doing any damage. They're probably, many landowners will be quite happy for you to have a look. If you share it with them, even better, tell them what you're finding. They'll be fascinated. But, most people, a lot of people have gardens. So, start garden larking in your own garden. You don't need to ask anyone's permission for that.
Yes.
And you never know what you might find.
Yes, indeed. And of course, if you have moles or anything like that, they often help you anyway because they're scratching up things from further down.
Absolutely. Moles and badgers and rabbits are the larker's friend. They dig around in very soft soil where some things have been dumped, old dumps. And, you can find all sorts on molehills.
Yeah.
Never pass a molehill without looking it over.
There's a motto to go. Yes. And the other point, of course, with beachcombing on the seashore and mudlarking on the river shore is the safety element of tides and mud. You can get yourself into great difficulty very quickly in mud, sinking, and obviously that the tides come up twice a day, and you really only got a quite small window between low tide and it starting to rise again, haven't you?
You have. On the Thames, you have a sort of safe, in most places, it changes depending where you are. In most places, you'll get a safe 2 hours either side of low tide, but always keep an eye on your exit routes. Make sure you don't get cut off because there are pinch points, and take a mobile phone with you, and ideally go with someone else as well, because you can get cut off, and the Thames is a very fast river. You don't want to get swept away by it. It's very cold as well, and you don't want to be that embarrassing person who has to call out the RNLI and waste their time having to save you.
Yes. And I say the same goes for seashores, where you can find yourself trapped at the foot of a cliff that you can't climb away and get to safety on.
Absolutely, and beware crumbling cliffs as well, depending where you are.
Yes. Now, I suppose one thing people who don't do it on a regular basis, any form of larking, is getting your eye in. And pottery is always one of those things where you don't know whether that's a piece of 1950s junk pottery or that piece of red earthenware. Is that a piece of Roman Samian ware, or is it a B&Q plant pot? Because they all look the same, don't they? How do you get your eye in where you're spotting what are the gems as distinct from what's just modern stuff? Well, really, I mean,
a lot of larking is knowing what you're looking for. And, it's knowing where to go. It's knowing how to look. And it's also what you're looking for, because I know I've walked over things I should have picked up and taken away in the past. But you're always learning, you're never not learning. And especially with pottery, I mean, there are people who devote their lives to it. No one ever knows all about pottery. There are little indicators, little things like Roman pottery there won't be a shiny glaze on Roman pottery. They had slip glazes, but there isn't a sort of that lovely shiny glassy glaze that you get on later pottery, and the lips of the rims are rounded rather than squared off. So there are little things that'll tell you enough to tell you if it's old or not. But really, it's time. Practice. Go to a lot of museums. Actually, have a look at the things. There's no. The best thing you can do is actually see some Roman pottery in real time, to know that when you're on the foreshore and you find a shard, that could be Roman pottery. So, really it's just reading lots of books, going to museums, and having an inquiring mind, always being open and always learning. You never stop learning.
What about things like metalwork, which obviously gets corroded and encrusted with all manner of stuff? Again, how do you know that lump of metal you're ignoring is something old as opposed to some bolts from a 1950s boat or building or something.
Yeah, I mean, it's often when you're actually handling it, you do get a sense of patina that, with age, and also handmade objects as opposed to machine-made objects. Screws, anything with a screw or a sort of screw top is likely to be not so old because they didn't really have screws or screw top pots and things like that way back when. Again, it's just time and experience. It's actually seeing things, and things do have a feel to them. Old things do have a feel to them. And if you find things you don't know what they are, just take them and research them. Don't leave them there. If you've got any sort of inkling there might be something, then take it away and have a better look at it and ask other people. Put it on some of the mudlarking groups, put it online and ask other people. And someone will know, or show it to your local finds liaison officer who work for the Portable Antiquities Scheme, and they'll be able to help you. I find iron objects difficult because often they're very corroded and you can't really even tell what they are. One of the most common objects I'm shown when I'm down on the foreshore and people come up to you with something to look, it's old, is welding rods. Welding rods and bits of sewer pipe are very popular pieces. People think are old, but they're not. But you do just get it. You just get a feel for it, and you just. I've got lots of really weird books on buckles and buttons and things like that, and so you just learn. And also, the Portable Antiquities Scheme has a fantastic database with over 1 million objects on it. So just spend your evenings flicking through that. It's actually quite interesting.
Yeah,
I sound incredibly nerdy, but I find it quite interesting just flicking through the pictures on there and the things that other people have found.
Yes, because one of the things I recall from the first book, Mudlarking, were the pins that you were finding there. And again, you think, how do you spot them, and how do you realise that they're something ancient and relevant? But I suppose that again is because they are handmade and they've got a different look to them, as you say, than mass-produced.
Yes, I mean they're brass as well. Modern pins are made of steel, so they rust away. You can tell just from looking at them that they're handmade. You can see the way they've curled a piece of wire around the top 3 times to make the head. Excuse me. They they wash up in patches and piles, and once you've found one, you start spotting them everywhere. And they date from. They're very hard to date because they didn't change hugely, but they date from around the early 1400s to the late 1700s when they invented the pin making machine. So handmade pins are once you spot them, they're pretty do what they say on the box. They are what they are.
How did so many of those end up in the river?
Simply because everyone was pinned into their clothes. It was, they obviously didn't have zips and poppers and things like that. Buttons were expensive, and the way people's clothes were made and worn, they relied on a lot of pins to pin them in. They pinned babies into swaddling. They were pinned into their death shrouds. So pins were very, very important. They held everyone together, and the pinning industry was enormous, huge. And the English pinning industry wasn't even big enough to keep up with demand, so they'd import them from France as well by the barrel full. And the English pins were the ones that everyone wanted. The French ones weren't as good, but the pinning industry was enormous and very, very, very important. And it's, of course, where the phrase pin money comes from, because every woman was given a certain amount of money to spend on pins for the family's pins, and it was known as pin money, and we still use the phrase today to mean just a little bit of insignificant money. Although it wasn't insignificant, they weren't that cheap.
Yeah, I didn't realise that you were pinned into your clothes. Yeah, yes, that explains it. Because again, going from the first book, you mention the fact that lots of small boats were used for ferrying people from one side of the river to the other. And the climbing in and out of boats, etc., were perfect opportunities for things to topple out of pockets or be dropped or end up in the water.
Yes. We find quite a lot of buckles that are bent and buttons with the shanks ripped off them, and you can just imagine them getting caught between the, maybe the planks in a boat and being pulled off as someone's trying to get out onto a muddy foreshore. So yes, the river was so busy. It was just full of boats, and so there was a lot being lost and dropped and thrown in.
You're listening to the Weird Tales radio show with Charles Christian.
Talk me through your thinking about the new book, A Field Guide to Larking.
Yeah, I mean, the new book is it's very different to the first book. It's an illustrated book, and it's designed to get people out and about and looking. I want people to rediscover the art of looking around them and considering who came before us and what they've left behind, all the little tiny, tiny clues of the things that have been, lost and dropped, but also also natural things as well, the unusual things. It really is to encourage people to create their own cabinet of curiosities, I suppose. I think that during COVID, people to a certain extent have rediscovered the simple things in life. Going outside, just spending time outside, slowing down. Previous to that, I think the world had just got so busy and so fast that people weren't seeing anymore. And it's a great therapy. It's a great time to just meditate and be by yourself doing something and nothing. And you can do it anywhere, and it's free. It's one of the few things in life that is free. You can just go out onto a beach. I mean, who hasn't gone onto a beach and looked down and picked up a pebble or picked up a shell, or gone through the strand line and found something strange that's washed up? We all still have this natural gathering instinct, and I just wanted to sort of spread it really, and to get people looking around. The illustrations in the book are done by my friend Johnny Mudlark, who I met many years ago on the foreshore, and he's a bit enigmatic. He doesn't have a phone or a computer, and I only ever really met him when I was down on the foreshore and happened to bump into him. And he showed me these beautiful diaries, little moleskin books, the smallest moleskin book, where he would record all the objects that he was finding, and he painted everything he found real size and miniature. And so they just looked like they could fall out of the pages in the book. And he had this exquisite little notebooks. And really that's where I got my inspiration for this from, was his notebooks. And I really just want to encourage people to get out there and try it themselves, I suppose.
Yes, because in the book, the new book, you have plenty of suggested layouts for notebooks and mapping where you've been and everything.
Yes, and drawing your own pictures and sticking things in, and there's lots of identification guides as well to help people with the more sort of popular things you're most likely to come across, ideas for where to go and look, where you're likely to find things. And it takes you through beaches and rivers and fields and even looking for things in your own house. And hopefully gets people thinking about what they're leaving behind. What's their legacy? What are we leaving that will be found by people to come in the future? Are you building an extension and signing the wall behind it? Are you leaving a little bit of yourself behind?
What sort of things can people find in their own homes then? I mean, obviously digging in your garden, you can find stuff.
Yes. I mean, obviously, if you live in an old house, if you take up the floorboards, have a good look in all the dirt and all the dust under the floorboards, because things will have fallen through the gaps. Yes. Children probably have posted things through the little cracks in the floorboards or lost their toys. It's amazing what you can find under floorboards if you're in an old house. People had a habit of carving on beams, especially over fireplaces, their initials. Sometimes you'll find these flower shapes, hexafoils, that they're thought to be protection from witches. And you find those above fireplaces as well, and by doors, anywhere the witches could have come in.
Yes.
Or the bad spirits could have come in to protect the house. Some people have found shoes. They were a very popular protection thing that people would put in the walls or under the floorboards. And cats, mummified cats, are another popular thing that people find. Coins, hidden in places. Even modern houses. If there's been a few generations or a few people living in it before you, they will have left something behind somewhere. They will have lost something or dropped something. Before banks, people used to hide their precious things around the house. So you might even find something that's real treasure, I suppose. Maybe somebody hid something and then they died before they had a chance to tell anyone where it was, or forgot about it. So you'd be surprised what you'll find in your own home. Underneath, if you're doing stripping the wallpaper, strip it carefully, because right at the bottom you'll find the very oldest wallpaper that can sometimes go back over 100 years, and you can preserve that little tiny bit, maybe under a bit of perspex, or peel it off carefully and put it in a frame. All tells the story of your house, our history and the way we've lived.
I mean, presumably you had a bit of that when you were a child growing up on a farm, because tendency of farms is to have lots of outbuildings, and unless you need to get rid of something, you just keep it there until you run out of space. So presumably there was lots of, not so much treasures, but old stuff there to discover.
Yeah, I suppose it depends what you call a treasure. One person's treasure is another person's trash.
Yes.
Famous saying. But, we had loads of rubbish going back generations on the farm. We had the old milking stools and all sorts they found in the barns when my parents moved in. And toys, quite a lot of toys that children had lost and sort of hidden behind things and had just got forgotten about. Our house was built in the 1400s. So, we did have, whenever you pulled anything up, you did have a good look to see what was there and what people had left behind. In my bedroom, somebody had carved their name into the plaster by my bed. So that was always a wonder to me who that person was and what they were doing when they wrote their name in there and why they did it. And we had the initials above the fireplace as well that people had carved in, on a sort of cold, wet, dark evening by a candlelight. You can just imagine them all sitting round, and somebody, a bit bored, decides to carve their name into the chimney breast. So yeah, it's it's amazing the stories that old buildings can tell.
One of the things you mentioned were toys, and in the new book you talk about a doll called a cold Charlotte, was it, or a frozen?
Frozen Charlottes, yes. Yes, I found one of those on the farm. They're these little tiny porcelain dolls, bisque porcelain dolls that were very popular from the sort of mid to late 1800s through to about the 1920s.
How small was small then?
Oh gosh, I found one on the river that was probably about less than an inch tall.
Oh, tiny we're talking.
Tiny, with black hair and little sort of angry eyes and little red lips. Very, very, very basic, very cheap toys. They were bought for a penny, sort of penny toys, could have been bought at fairs. They were also baked into cakes as sort of little whoever got the frozen Charlotte was the lucky person, or broke their tooth on it. It was unlucky.
Broke their tooth, yes.
But yeah, they were very, very popular, these little frozen Charlottes. And they were named after, it was an American folk ballad all about a girl who went off to a party in the snow in a sleigh with her fiancé, but she refused to wear a coat. And she froze to death on her way to this party, and her name was Charlotte. And because these little dolls look like they're just frozen, because they're just all moulded in one piece, and they're white as well, they became known as frozen Charlottes.
That's lovely. I mean, I've never heard that before. I mean, we're all familiar with the slightly scary Victorian dolls that are, well, dolly-sized and much beloved of horror movies these days, or the Jane Fonda Barbarella movie, if you're of that age. But I never realised they also made the tiny ones.
Yes, tiny ones. Yeah, I find most dolls quite creepy, actually.
Yes.
Even the sort of plastic ones you find washed up as well can be quite revolting, especially when they've got mould all over them or sort of algae growing out of them. They're just, ooh.
Yes.
But yeah.
Yes, I've beachcombed and seen a small disembodied dolly arm sticking out of the shingle.
It's quite horrible.
Yes. And I know, again, you mentioned that you can sometimes discover human remains, either historical or, sadly, more recent suicides in the river. But what about heading off down the Medway, Isle of Sheppey, Sheerness? Because aren't there some islands round there that were used as burial grounds for when the hulks, the prison hulks, were there?
There are, yes. I mean, there's a very famous island called Dead Man's Island out in the Medway that you're not allowed to go to. Obviously, it's a mass grave. It would be very tasteless to go out there for a start, but it's private and you're not allowed to go out there. And they used Dead Man's Island to bury. They also had the ships would moor up if they had a contagious disease on board. They had to quarantine out there. So people died, and they died on the prison ships. They were the most awful places, and disease was rife. And if somebody died, they'd row them to the nearest patch of marshy ground. It was all marshland, horrible, scrubby, very sort of Dickensian Magwitch crawling through the marshes kind of place. And they row them out to the nearest patch of marshy ground and bury them in a shallow grave. And of course, we've got rising sea levels because of global warming. And the river's starting to erode out these islands, get higher, and the coffins and the bones are starting to erode out, and you do find remains out there. So I recently found a skull, a human skull, out on the it was actually out on the Medway, and if you find human remains on the river, however old you think they are, you must report them to the police. And there had been a missing person in the area, so the police took it seriously. They took all the bones in, and they radiocarbon dated it to around 250 years ago. So this person was from one of the prison ships. They could have been a Napoleonic prisoner of war, or possibly someone waiting to be transported to Australia or Tasmania, somewhere like that.
Yes.
And so yes, you do find human remains, obviously on the river. There's people have been living alongside it for years. There's people have fallen and been thrown in and buried nearby, and there's all sorts of reasons they end up in the river. But as I say, all human remains must be reported to the police.
On a sort of cheerier note, what is the most exciting thing you've ever found there?
I think actually, I always used to say it was my complete Tudor shoe. I've got a complete child's Tudor shoe, which is hard to say, and that is very exciting because, of course, the river mud is anaerobic. So it stops oxygen getting to it, and it can preserve the most incredible, organic matter. And so you do find a lot of shoes and shoe soles, and this is a complete child's shoe. But I have been searching. I've been mudlarking now for about 20 years, and I've been searching most of that time for a medieval pilgrim badge, and had never found one until last year. And I found my first complete one. I have found pieces of them, but I found my first complete one last year, and that was probably the most exciting thing I've ever found, simply because I've been looking for it for so long. And it's a pilgrim badge of St. Osmond from Salisbury. And medieval pilgrims, obviously, they go off on these pilgrimages, and much like we buy a fridge magnet these days, they buy a pewter badge of the saint just to say that they've been there and to bring a little bit of the magic of the shrine back with them. And then a lot of them ended up in the river. There's one theory that people would throw them in as a thanks for a safe return, in that way that we've been throwing things into the river for ever, really. Yeah. And that's why there's so many in the river, and they do wash up. And I did find this really nice. It's quite an unusual one. The most common one that people find are Becket badges, because there was a shrine to St. Thomas Becket across Midway, across the old medieval bridge. But this one, coming all the way from Salisbury, was a little bit different, and it's beautiful. It's really beautiful. I was really chuffed with that.
And you say that the tradition for making offerings still continues in the sense of you're finding items that have clearly modern, that have been thrown in by members of the Hindu community.
Yes, people are still make offerings to the river. I mean, it's majority of them are Hindu, because obviously the Hindu religion has this affinity with water and with rivers. But I've also found Wiccan spells. I've found West African offerings. I've found crucifixes, Jewish offerings, Islamic. You name it. Everyone seems to be going down there. People throw coins. You find so many modern coins under bridges. People are still tossing pennies into the river for luck. It's been a place of offering for many thousands of years. So and people are still doing it, and it's an important part of the city's history. That it's continuing like this. This is our legacy now. These offerings. The problem is the plastic offerings that are being put in. And I was recently on a radio show on BBC Asian Network, asking people not to throw plastic offerings in, because it goes against what the Hindus teach, because the offerings should naturally break down and go back into the environment. That is the problem. That's the moral dilemma. Do you leave the plastic offerings there, or do you take them away? Are they rubbish? So that's the dilemma, is plastic.
Hey guys, news! The title is Shuckland, and it's a brand new book by Charles Christian. It takes you on a journey through the weird wonders and intriguing mysteries of the Waveney Valley. Explore with Charles the truth behind the notorious black shuck of the book's title. Be transported to a world of demonic entities, murderous earls, ley lines, witchcraft, paganism, and discover the facts behind the outrageous legends and folklore of this seemingly peaceful corner of England. Shuckland is a 200-page illustrated paperback available through bookshops and online via Amazon and Books Etc., as well as the Urban Fantasist website at www.urbanfantasist.com. Shuckland is priced at $12.95, and there's an ebook version available on Amazon priced just £3.25. Shuckland, get yours today.
What are your next writing projects? As it's a well-known fact that once an author's got a book out, there's already, while they were writing that one, got a second one in mind, and once that's out, there's another third one. What are you thinking on next?
I have things in the pipeline, definitely. Nothing firmed up yet, but I'm quite sure there will be another book in the future. I can't let on too much now.
No, exactly. As we were discussing before we started recording, somebody might well pitch your idea.
Exactly.
Is there a particular good time or good season for doing your larking? I mean, obviously with the fields, the best time is after the field has been ploughed and harrowed and before the croppers started to come through. With the sea, you have the spring tides, which tend to be a lot higher and a lot lower. So you can see things that previously are out of sight. Is there a seasonal element with river-based mudlarking?
Well, I mean, with beach larking, I'd say it's after the storms, any sort of storm or winds that whip things up. Certainly where I live in Kent, we get the amber. You get more amber in the winter after the winter storms. So winter storms are good for revealing things on beaches. And like you say, after the plough on the fields, with the Thames where it's tidal, the spring tides. So the equinox tides during the spring and the autumn are the best times when you get the really low tides, and then you can get to more more stuff. Just ordinary rivers anytime. Anytime's good. Depends whether you want to get cold or not. Probably a sort of warm sunny day would be much nicer. In central London, I prefer going on the foreshore, to be honest. In the winter when there's less people. So I find it easier to find things when the foreshore's wet. So a cold rainy day is good for me.
Right. Yeah, you mentioned amber, and I was intrigued you mentioned that it's also can be found on the section of the East Anglian coast from Southwold down.
Yes.
Which I must admit, I'd never realised that this was an area for amber.
Yes, that's the best place to look for amber is around the East Anglian coast.
Right. I mean, I whenever I go down there, I just come back with lots of very boring fossils, which I've been collecting since I was tiny, or witch stones with the holes in them. But that area is very good for them. But that does raise a thing again. This, getting your eye in, because again, as a kid, I remember seeing stones in rock pools, and they were shiny and wonderful looking, and then you'd pick them up and take them home, and then they'd dry out, and they'd just be a dull pebble.
Yes.
Again, how do you spot the gem? Not literally a gem, but the something that's special from just a bit of any old stone.
Again, really, it's knowledge. It's doing your homework before you go. If you know you're going to a specific beach where there will be a specific sort of stone, know what it looks like. The internet's a great place for that. So you know what you're looking for. I went to see them on our way back from holiday, actually, just a couple of days ago.
That's Seaham up in
County Durham.
County Durham, yeah.
Yeah, and it's famous for its sea glass because there were bottle factories and glass factories there, and it's just incredible the amount of sea glass. But you're looking for the multicolours. I used to go there when I was at university many years ago, and I had a great collection, but it's all got lost in the mist of time.
Yes.
So I took my daughter there, and we were I really didn't think we'd find much because it's got quite popular there. But we did. We found quite a lot of. I've got them in front of me on my desk here. Actually, I've just been putting baby oil on them to make them look nice, and we found quite a lot of nice bits of multicoloured sea glass. So it's knowing where to go. It's doing your research, and what I'm hoping is this book's is just a start. It's just a taster, and get people into going to some of the more popular places and more better known places, I suppose. And starting to think about what's in their local area and what they can find.
Yes, you've got some lovely illustrations in the new book of the different types of sea glass, and which are
sea glassing is a massive thing. I mean, I'm not a huge sea glasser, but there are a lot of forums online about sea glass if you're into it.
Yes.
People rank it according to how common it is. So yeah, there's a huge sea glassing community out there. And that's the great thing. There are communities for everything. Nothing is too weird. You will find people who specialize in the most specialist of objects, and you'll find something or someone online that you can contact to talk about it. That's the great thing about the internet. That's the one good thing about the internet. It can be great for that.
Yes, that you can be put in touch with people that you would never previously ever hope of finding or even knew existed. Yeah.
Yes.
No, that's brilliant. What about, we still have a few more weeks of summer. Have you got any more expeditions planned?
Well, I have got, at the moment, I'm gearing up for the launch of my book, which is next week.
Yes.
There is an exhibition on at Southwark Cathedral, which is based on the book. So we've sort of brought some of the pages from the book to life with real objects. And it's as COVID friendly as we could make it. So it's in a nice airy room, and it's you can take your time. It's on until the end of October, so there's plenty of time to go and see it.
End of October, right?
End of October. You've got a long time to go and see it, so you can avoid all the crowds and go at your own speed. And yes, I will be going out as much as I can, mudlarking on the river. I haven't. I've been on holiday and I've missed it, so I'll be getting down there definitely next week, and on into the autumn, and then we've got the equinox tides coming. So I'll be preparing myself for those.
Yes, that's brilliant. Well, that's a perfect note to end on. Thank you ever so much for your time, Lara. That was absolutely fascinating. And I say, as a child who spent all his holidays on the rock pools at Scarborough, where I grew up, peering in and bringing home the most awful rubbish most of the time, thinking it was a treasure. No, it's a bit of old brick, but I just find it fascinating. So I say it very much resonates with me that is the case.
It does take you back to your childhood. It brings out your inner child. It takes you back to those carefree days of just and looking and picking up rubbish.
Yes.
Finding it and calling it treasure.
Exactly. That's it. Little treasures. Where can you find your book? I mean, obviously bookshops.
Available all bookshops, hopefully, and all online shops, including the evil one. So
right.
try and buy independently.
Yes, lovely. Okay, then. Thank you ever so much for your time.
You're welcome.
Once again, a big thank you to this week's guest, Lara Maiklem. Her new book, A Field Guide to Larking, which is a gorgeous illustrated handbook to the subject, is published this week in the UK by Bloomsbury Publishing, priced £14.99. You can follow Lara on Facebook and Twitter at London Mudlark and on Instagram at london.mudlark, where she shows pictures of her latest finds. Anyway, that's almost it, but before we go, one final thought, courtesy of the science fiction author, the late Harlan Ellison. You are not entitled to your opinion. You are entitled to your informed opinion. No one is entitled to be ignorant. Now it just remains for me to say this is Charles Christian saying thank you so much for listening in. Please join me again next week for more strange tales for strange times. Until then, stay well, stay weird. Goodbye.
Black Shuck, the demon dog of East Anglia, is baying at the moon, which means it's time for us to go. You've been listening to the Weird Tales radio show with Charles Christian, your weekly fix of ghost stories, urban myths, witchcraft, folklore, and the paranormal. You can keep in touch with us online at www.urbanfantasist.com, by email to urbanfantasist@icloud.com, and on Twitter @urbanfantasist. Join us again next week for another edition of the Weird Tales radio show. Goodbye.